Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Cooper. My pronouns are she, they. I am a Master's of Divinity student at Central Baptist Theological Seminary. I am also a member of the Peace and Justice Certificate cohort that is hosting today's session. I live in the Kansas City area. I will be monitoring today's session in the chat box. So if you have any questions, please drop them within the chat and we will get to them at the end. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Andrew Long Higgins. He is a team leader of Global Hope at the National Ministry of the United Church of Christ. In his role, he oversees international development, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, volunteer engagement, and refugee and migration services. Before joining National Ministries of the United Church of Christ, Andrew worked in conflict mediation as the head of operations at the Center of Peace Diplomacy, leading mediation efforts on Syrian crisis. He also served in humanitarian roles in Lebanon and worked in international security policy at Columbia University. He holds a bachelor's in political science and a master's in in public administration. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Long Higgins. Andrew, take it away.
Thanks so much, Stacy. It's I want to say good to be here, but also weird to be here that we're having this conversation at all. And so I uh I'll expand a little bit on Stacy's introduction of the Global Hope team, just provide a little bit more context on how the UCC carries out and engages in the international humanitarian space. And then I'll move into what we are seeing, at least from the Global Hope team, the various fallouts and challenges immediately as a result of the elimination of USAID and other U.S. federal humanitarian assistance and aid, sustainable development funding, and then also move into a few remarks just on where I see um, the immediate kind of question, some of the immediate questions in strategic thinking that I think needs to be happening as well, so that we're not just focused on the crisis in front of us. As Stacey mentioned, I serve as team leader of the Global Hope team at the National Ministries of the United Church of Christ. HOPE is an acronym that stands for Humanitarian Opportunities, Partnerships, and Empowerment. It's the umbrella team that carries out the UCC's domestic disaster response and recovery work, refugee and migration services, volunteer engagement, and international sustainable development and humanitarian assistance. How does Global Hope operate? One of the longstanding programmatic priorities of the UCC is decolonization. As such, the UCC uses a local empowerment and accompaniment model when engaging in the humanitarian assistance space. All of our work, domestic and international, is based around the core philosophy that local actors know their contexts and communities better than we ever will, and as such, are best placed to tailor and carry out humanitarian interventions in their context. Our model aims to return agency to local actors and support and complement their efforts to serve their local communities. This includes providing support that increases local capacity as well as direct program support. Internationally, we work closely with both bilateral partners and multilateral bodies such as ACT Alliance. ACT Alliance is a global network of 140 member partners who operate in over 120 countries. The network employs about 30,000 staff collectively and mobilizes about $2 billion in assistance each year. ACT Alliance is the current iteration of an ecumenical relationship network that was started by the World Council of Churches in the mid-1990s. If you're familiar with that space, it grew out of the WCC's Interim Emergency Committee. We support local implementing partners who are engaged in emergency humanitarian interventions in response to natural disasters and conflict, agricultural development programs, and community resiliency and capacity building programs. Many of our partners pursue intersectional and multi-sector approaches to their work and context, and that's something we really strive is not looking at single issue things, but really trying to work with partners who see the systemic impact of their work. When I agreed to join this conversation, there were a few questions posed. One of which is, in what ways has your work been affected by the suspension of United States foreign aid? The short answer is that while Global Hope is not dependent on U.S. federal funding, nearly every aspect of our work and programming has been impacted in some ways by the executive orders and federal level policy changes that have occurred over the last month. Internationally, as I mentioned earlier, the UCC through Global Hope supports international humanitarian interventions and bilateral relationships. Most of our bilateral partners are smaller faith-based organizations operating at more micro levels of intervention in their immediate context, and as such are have been less affected largely by the or largely I should say less directly affected by those funding cuts. We're currently working on an assessment looking at how our partners are seeing the ripple effects of the funding cuts. And while the data and input from that study is still coming in, our initial assessment is that the good news, like I said, is very few of our direct local partners have been forced to make immediate reduction in staff decisions and/or cuts to programmatic activities. Like I said, this is largely due to the fact that they're not directly dependent on U.S. aid or federal funding money. Two, however, many of our partners work with and coordinate their activities with organizations that did receive U.S. aid and other federal foreign aid money. And the shock of the sudden collapse of these programs within the local context cannot be understated. Many of our local partners are now trying to figure out how to best adjust their own programs and attempt to meet that sudden increase in need that's been left by programs that have had to close their doors and lay off staff. One of the areas where we're seeing and anticipating larger disruptions, especially, is around complications in regional coordination. For instance, the current refugee response to the conflict in Eastern DRC is dependent on regional coordination that includes actors operating in multiple countries. And many of these regional coordinating mechanisms are supported by larger NGOs and multilateral agencies who have been hit hardest by the recent funding cuts. To expand on that a bit further, it's not just that there isn't money for material assistance, it's also that you have the simultaneous exacerbation of nearly every complex emergency around the world and a reduction of everyone's capability to respond in an efficient and coordinated manner to those complex emergencies. Domestically, I know this presentation is titled Beyond Borders, but I'd be remiss if I didn't also touch on the impacts the recent policy changes are having on our domestic ability to provide humanitarian assistance and its connection to the reductions in foreign funding. We know that as vulnerable populations are faced with impossible decisions, there will be an increase in human migration. At the same time that you have this massive reduction in humanitarian sector's ability to address the needs of vulnerable people in their home communities, you also then have this simultaneous indefinite ban on refugee admission and funding halt. So both our ability to meet needs in home spaces and our ability to then respond if in their inevitable migration from those situations is both compromised at this point. One of our primary partners, Church World Service, who many of you might know, is one of, I think, if I remember right, 6 resettlement agencies contracted by the State Department in the United States. It's been forced to lay off about 60% of their staff, in large part because the federal government has not paid them for services already rendered prior to the funding freeze, let alone freezes on their and stop work orders on their current and future work. Last week, the UCC hosted Church World Services Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Covenant Partner Gathering. The primary topic of that conversation was an examination of what the disaster response landscape could look like and is probably increasingly going to look like if FEMA, the National Weather Service, and NOAA are eliminated or reduced. And the shift of the burden of disaster response from the federal space to the state and local infrastructure. Like what we're seeing internationally, one of the primary concerns is our ability to effectively coordinate our responses that mitigate gaps in humanitarian intervention and ensure that the most vulnerable are cared for. What does this mean for Global Hope's work now and moving forward? As I was thinking about this question, I see kind of 3 big buckets that I'm doing some intentional thinking on. One is programmatic support, one is education and advocacy, and one is I've labeled survivability. Programmatic support, as I mentioned previously, in the context of the global humanitarian space, the UCC is a relatively small player, But since coming into this role last year, one of my priorities has been how can we be more strategic in how we support programs such that each dollar spent has a multiplying effect. I'm looking at that in two levels: capacity building and support, and direct program support and their interaction. Um, a call yesterday, someone raised that if there is a silver lining to any of this, it's that our future responses are going to require finding new ways to make the global humanitarian sector less reliant on what are now high-risk support structures. As one of our partners, my partners in the Global South, told me yesterday, we've long known that the current system of development and assistance is based on a large global system of historic hegemony and wealth disparity. And this current reality is going to force us to rethink about how we work together and how we structure that international system such that it's more resilient and more robust from the whims of a few policymakers. To advocacy and education, in the before times, as I like to refer, it was enough to make the moral argument for our work as humanitarian actors. I think the challenge now is how do you make the moral argument to policymakers who have made it clear that they don't care about the moral argument? The traditional model of advocacy was to mobilize your base to make calls and put pressure on public representatives to shift policy. I think that is still applicable, though less so. The argument that I'm starting to make is that, and encourage people to think about, is if we're really going to be successful in the advocacy space today, we both need to continue to keep our committed constituencies informed. But if we want to engage in advocacy that doesn't necessarily hope to reverse these policy changes, but at least stem some of the bleeding, it's going to require us as humanitarian actors to get out of our comfort zone a bit and reframe the language that we use to talk about our work in language that this particular administration does respond to. And two questions that I think we have to start thinking about how we frame our work is, how does humanitarian work ultimately save the American taxpayer money? And how does the humanitarian work we do serve the interests of the United States? And that's not to say that we should lose sight of our commitment to decolonization and humanitarian principles, but that is just a pragmatic assessment of finding ways to make sure our message is getting through some of the noise and some of the rhetorical blocks that have been put up by this administration. And three, survivability. I see two factors affecting the survivability of organizations operating in this space. The obvious one is funding, and the second one, connected but slightly different, is long-term momentum. Um, the obvious consequence of these policy shifts is an immediate cessation of critical funding that allows for programs to run and humanitarian assistance to be distributed. Absent government funding, the funding burden will shift increasingly to private donors. And as more and more organizations feel this crunch, there's going to be more and significant competition for donors' attention and dollars. Um, I am I am fearful that this increased attention poses a real risk of exacerbating donor fatigue and burnout. And the question then becomes, how does our sector prevent itself from cannibalization, and implosion? For Global Hope, since 100% of our funding comes from local churches, our biggest challenges in many ways are similar to what they've been over the last 20 years. And that's how do we maintain and expand our capacity to reduce human suffering in a socio-political climate where church attendance and annual giving continues to be in decline. From a fundraising perspective, like I said, I have real concern about how we collectively as a sector manage donor fatigue. I can't stress this enough. Especially in the US context, the administration's strategy of everything all at once has created immense need on multiple fronts. And ultimately, what that ends up, the effect of that is that we have immediate pressing needs that then become in competition to one another for attention and donor dollars. And it's trying to find ways of how do we develop a unified coordinated strategy such that we don't get distracted by all of our causes that we care deeply about. As a larger organization, the UCC is working to develop organization-wide plans to manage our communication and philanthropy strategies, such that at least as an organization, we're not stepping on each other's toes, and that we're engaging our wider church members in a way that is constructive, diligent, informative, but also strategic. For me personally, I think it's vital that we're aware of what's happening immediately in front of us, certainly, but we also need to start thinking about how these impacts are going to affect, 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out. Start to rebuild systems that don't just respond to the current crisis, but again, how do we make the system more resilient moving forward? And ultimately, how do we do all of this work without losing sight of, for me, the fundamental question of how do we return and increase agency to the world's most vulnerable populations? I'll leave it there. Happy to answer any questions that when they arise.
I really appreciate that, Andrew. We will do some question and answer at the end. You've given us a lot of great information, and I definitely have some follow-up questions for you when we get to that to that section. At this point, we've received some communication from our international presenters that they're having a little bit of trouble connecting, so we're going to adjust the speaking order here for a moment to ask Dr. Sarah Lofgren to present next. And so to introduce her, I will turn it over to Dr. Richards.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you so much, Andrew. Our next speaker is Dr. Sarah Lofgren, an infectious disease physician, researcher, and assistant professor of medicine. Her work focuses on barriers to HIV care in Uganda, with a particular interest in mood disorders and addiction among people living with HIV. Dr. Lofgren holds a BA in biochemistry from the University of Minnesota, Morris, and earned her MD from Duke University. Her medical training took her to Moshi, Tanzania, and she later completed her internal medicine residency at Emory University. She went on to complete an infectious disease fellowship at the University of Minnesota, where she was also a Fogarty International Center Fellow in Kampala, Uganda. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Lofgren. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. Let me see. Oh, it's going to only share my whole screen. Let me see if I go there. Are you seeing in presenter mode or are you seeing all the things?
We can see everything. That looks great.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to primarily focus on PEPFAR, which is what I know the most about, but I can also speak to other related things. I can also talk at the end on I realized there was questions about university impacts, and so I can speak at least particularly the University of Minnesota, which I know the most about. Sorry. Okay, so HIV care in Uganda, which is what I've done the most of. So I've done multiple trials in HIV, and they've all been embedded in HIV clinics, and some of them are sort of formal clinics that you'd see anywhere, and some of them are pretty informal, but all are quite impressive. This tent says USAID from the American people, which I've always felt really proud about being abroad and seeing what has been the commitment to people around the globe. So in terms of thinking about HIV care, our critical and like number 1 through 5 of HIV care is getting people on medications. And when we think about PEPFAR, which I'm guessing not everyone knows what that is or does, it implements HIV medications as well as the care around the globe. And so in the 90s, we had these complicated regimens of like a ton of drugs that people would take, but that's progressed to one pill once a day. And so in the like late 90s, medications were available in the US, including one pill once a day even, like in the early 2000s, but they were not globally available. And this was leading to a lot of sort of unrest and taking out a lot of the population of, especially in Africa, but also in parts of Asia and Latin America. And the biggest thing was getting drugs to people. So the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, was what was implemented to overcome this. And some of these slides are from a recent conference that were shared for me from the International AIDS Society. So it was my favorite thing that George W. Bush did in his presidency. So he implemented PEPFAR in 2003. He told Anthony Fauci to go to Africa and try to figure out how should we solve this problem. It's been reauthorized in bipartisan basis 4 times, and it's really been fairly well appreciated until recently. Um, it's been an interesting way that it was implemented because it went through the State Department originally. And so you think about it being more through like the CDC or other HHS or something like that. But it actually came as sort of our soft power response to the world, which I mean is one of the most effective and impressive ways that we've used our power as Americans. It's been really critical and it's worked in 50 countries worldwide. PEPFAR is not directly working, so it'll work partly through USAID and other the CDC and other partners, but its goal is to impact HIV where it's the worst. They've saved 25 million people. 5 million babies have been born without HIV, and they've gone to a number of other like high risk populations to ensure that they have the care that they need. It's really an impressively effective program that's really been helpful over the last 22 years, I guess. So this is sort of the broad strokes that I'll go over quickly. But anyway, since President Trump was sworn in, there was a reevaluating foreign aid and a freeze, stop work order, and so a lot of USAID folks have been laid off, and that has led to the realignment, as all of you, I'm sure, are well aware. It's been really confusing, and so it's been kind of back and forth as with a lot of these, but PEPFAR has been directly impacted, unfortunately. And so like there has been this waiver, but then part of the thing with the waiver for health, for life-saving care, which you would think PEPFAR would fall under, has been challenging because like the payment system got shut down as part of the original implementation. So even if you tried to like scale it back, you couldn't because you couldn't pay for the things that were stopped. And so it's just been really, really chaotic for people. And so what's been in the media has not been what my colleagues have seen on the ground, and what people are hearing is not happening, and what's being reported is it's very dependent and nothing's very clear. And then recently, this was just this week, a federal judge said that the USAID shutdown violated the Constitution, but some of these things are not, even if you wanted to sort of put it back together, it's somewhat really broken. And so I'm not even sure what of this could be reinstated. But at the moment, it's not looking good for PEPFAR going forward. PEPFAR does the like puts the majority of its money through USAID, and so not having USAID is really important for HIV care around the globe, but also other the money actually goes through multiple different agencies. And so this is some modeled impact. And so, I mean, all of this is obviously very quick, but a number of the health folks have tried to project what will happen from all the shutdown. So this is just from PEPFAR, and this was as of yesterday. They think that there's been 24,000 people who have died to date since the shutdown, and 2,600 children have died because we stopped giving this aid. And again, modeling is always sort of taken with a grain of salt, but and it seems like it will continue and go on. The challenge is that there's a large number of people every day. I mean, it's such a large group of people that are covered by PEPFAR. So 200,000 people every day getting HIV medications, and there's a large number of healthcare workers that are supported. And it varies by the country and how it's covered. So some like more rich countries, say Costa Rica, is able to cover some more of theirs, but they also don't have as much HIV, whereas Uganda is covered, more than 60% of their HIV funding is covered by PEPFAR. And so it's very devastating and very uncertain, and sort of thrown a lot of the health sector in Uganda into some chaos. This is just some projection from like that 12 high disease burden countries, that if by 2030 it's not reinstated, what will happen? And so this is sort of like the natural history of HIV if you don't have medications for the large part. So whereas this is what it was projected to be, and so like we've really come down on the number of new of deaths because people can live to be into their 80s. Orphans are rising, and we project that we'll have an increasing number, and it'll sort of return to what it was like around 2000, where there were just words of like hospice and all these young people. And HIV is particularly devastating because it attacks young people in like their 20s and 30s, and so it takes out like the most economically uh, the time that people are the most productive, and while they have children, and so it leaves all these orphans for people to have to work with. Let's see. So there's been some modeling in South Africa, particularly. South Africa is notable both for being a large country and then for having one of the highest prevalence of HIV. It's a complicated story, but they project that if there's no PEPFAR, there'll be 600,000 deaths in South Africa, with almost the same number of new infections, and it's a huge healthcare spending. For HIV in particular, treatment is prevention. And so if someone is on their medication and doing well, they can't spread the disease. So it's both like the treatment of that person, but also it means that other people, including the babies that are born to HIV positive women, won't get HIV if they get the appropriate care. And so it's just really devastating to see a sudden cutoff. Also, there had been plans, and it's been sort of discussed for some number of years, that they had a 5-year plan that could have been condensed. That if there'd been like warning that we're going to phase out PEPFAR over time, that they could have implemented, but to just suddenly stop funding and or interrupt and whatever has happened has been just really devastating. So significant disruptions in the implementing partners, staff layoffs, clinic closures, financial instability, and a lot of organizations have shuttered. And it's really dependent on what their other each group has their like sort of financial portfolio, and like I've been working in 2 large clinics in Kampala, Uganda, and one of them is nearly shuttered their research program, and they've cut a whole bunch of staff. The other one seems more intact, but I think it's more covered by the Ministry of Health and has some other partners that have been more stable. And there's different interpretations of the waiver. So, I mean, it says that like it's covered, but nobody really knows, and they're trying to apply, but it's not very clear. And so, like, a lot of things have stopped where like the meds were in the cabinet, but they weren't giving them to people, or like people were trying to get meds from different clinics and going around because they were so afraid. A different clinic, actually, there were like 1,000 people lined up just hoping to get HIV meds right after the closures were announced. And so it's just a lot of fear and worry. Ministries of Health are trying to go forward and make plans, but again, with all the chaotic nature of this has made it hard to plan. And so for staff on the ground, it's been silence, fear, exhaustion, and it's sort of unclear. A lot of the places they put back sort of short-term contracts through the end of April, but we're not sure what happens after that. If they'll just be fired, or if they'll be part of sort of that. I guess Secretary of State Rubio said that 83% would be cut, but if it's part of that 17%, no, it's everyone's sort of waiting for what all the details are. In Uganda specifically, the movement has been to try to do integration. So I've been in these public clinics or health centers, and they have a couple different thrusts that have are the main part of it. And so they're through the Ministry of Health. They focus on HIV, TB, and have like maternity health. And there is some like obstetric care, some of which the largest centers are inpatient. And so those centers will continue regardless of whether there's PEPFAR or not. The idea is that it just sort of integrate into other general clinics, but the challenge with that is just that there's not a lot of general clinic infrastructure to begin with. And so to try to say that it's going to integrate into the existing system, I don't know. From my perspective, doesn't make a lot of sense because there isn't that much infrastructure to begin with. But I mean, it was generally going the other direction. So HIV had a pretty good footing. And so they were trying to integrate chronic care from HIV into the other sectors. To try to go the other way is just, it's just much less stable and well developed. But I mean, it's at least a plan, which I appreciate. on the ground and talking to people is just kind of chaos and fear. This was just tweeted recently that the Ministry of Health in Uganda is saying like there are drugs available, they're free, and that they're committed to doing that. The challenge and what nobody knows, and as a HIV researcher who's trying to continue to work in Uganda, is that there are a number of things that are on formulary, like some of the opportunistic infections that come with HIV include fungal diseases, and so some of my colleagues try to work on that. And so that they initially counted on these meds because they're on formulary to be in stock, but they're actually never on stock. So they gave up and just expect to have to provide them. And so I don't know going forward if like officially they'll be covered and unofficially they won't. It's just not clear yet. And so that's my sense and sort of on the ground. I've been continuing to try to do work, and I have sort of a team at a couple different clinics in Kampala. Our sense is that it's just very varied, that we're sort of waiting for the details, that we don't really know all of the fallout from everything, and we're hoping that people will go. But like the woman next to me is a psychiatrist named Nita Erinda, and she's not sure if her clinical post at one of the clinics is going to be cut because they're just cutting a whole bunch of different services because they don't have the funding for it. And I'm been keeping sort of the rest of the team while we sort of await the rest of the focus. In terms of other university things, I mean, it seems like the Trump administration has been sort of going after a number of other universities, or I don't know, targeting people largely under the idea of DEI. And so there was an attempt to cut NIH funding, some of these indirect costs, and that seems to have been stopped, but I think it's still at some amount of risk. And that's a little bit of like a technical area, but it's real money that like the University of Minnesota, I think it was something like $100 million, which like a university can't just absorb that. And so it means that like a lot of things would be cut if that is stopped, which I think it could be in the future. All of the DEI grants were cut altogether and they just like disappeared. So I had two young women in a grant writing, like young early career women who were writing DEI grants, and what they were planning to do just disappeared, and so it's not funded anymore. So they just had to kind of retool and restart. There's been a lot of postponements and chaos sort of in the NIH in general, which I've never seen before. So I have a grant that's pending to be reviewed next week. And I think it's going to still happen. Like it looks like it will be, but it's not clear. My mentor had a study session like 4 weeks ago that was just postponed. Like they were a couple days ahead, just like stopped it, and it wasn't clear when it would be scheduled. And the challenge is that like these are really busy people, and so to just reschedule these reviews, I mean, it means everything sort of stops and like there's delays, which in science is a huge deal. A number of universities, because of this, there's hiring freezes or firings. So Johns Hopkins fired like 2,000 people, and it's largely because of these cuts. And a lot of them work internationally. At the University of Minnesota, we haven't seen that as much. We do have a lot of global work, but it's a lot more tied to the NIH or other funding that hasn't been quite as like directly targeted. The University of Minnesota is part of a multi-university lawsuit for race-based scholarships, and so it's unclear exactly what'll happen with that, but regardless, it'll be litigation in time that they're doing versus other things. The University of Minnesota Board of Regents passed an agreement that individuals can talk, but that as a university, they won't comment on political things. And then, yeah, again, multiple universities have lost funding, but to date, I think there were a few HIV specific grants that have been cut, but it's not sort of across the board. And so, I mean, me and my colleagues are just sort of trying to hang in there and hope that it's going to improve, or at least, I don't know, continue, but it's not clear. In my grant writing class, we were joking about like the bad words. And so like diversity, equity, inclusion, race, sex, but it's like all of the things that we were supposed to just do. And like inclusion is a word, but like inclusion criterion studies and some of the things that we're not supposed to do just don't make sense. And so you can't, it's just hard to do science even if you can't say some of these. And my work is like, like I'm writing a grant on an intervention to reduce alcohol abuse in people with HIV in Uganda. And so it's like, well, all of the words are bad. Like, how do you even like write a grant that's I don't know, and all of the things that could be easily targeted, and yet it's going to be so needed. And if anything, like I imagine that the rates of alcohol abuse will go up because it's just so stressful and uncertain, and like that will impact the economic health of other sectors because the health and research sector is a big one in Uganda. So I mean, I think that work is needed, but what will happen to the funding is not clear. So I mean, we're trying to find creative ways to sort of go around, I don't know, these AI algorithms, but no one really knows what's going to happen. For researchers, I mean, if there's a lack of funding, we could like lose a lot generation of researchers. And I've heard some of like my department chair said that straight out. And so I mean they're hoping it won't happen, but planning that there might be some of us just can't get grants because of like all of these cuts and like infectious disease in particular, probably because of COVID and vaccines and everything, are being particularly targeted. And so they don't want to lose a whole generation of researchers because it's like an apprentice model. And so if you lose sort of the mid-level, like you won't have anybody to train your the people sort of behind. So I mean, I think that some universities can absorb it, but others can't. So that's sort of what I have formally, but I'm happy to uh, talk more or whatever is useful.
That's wonderful, Dr. Lofgren. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on that as well. But we did get one of our international speakers who has successfully joined now, Reverend Ambesu Tola. And so I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Sifiwaswamy Dlamini, who's going to introduce Reverend Tola. Whoops, Sifiwaswamy, I'm sorry, could you unmute yourself? I think you accidentally remuted yourself.
Hello everyone. My name is Sifiwaswamy Dlamini. I am from the Kingdom of Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. I am a proud member of the Peace and Justice Ministry cohort. I am here this evening to introduce our next speaker, who is Reverend Ambesu Tola Feisa. Reverend Ambesu Tola Feisa is an ordained denomination leader and the founder and executive director of Fire Integrated Development Organization, which is in Ethiopia. For over 22 years, Rev Feisa has led IDO in its mission to serve vulnerable communities by addressing poverty, disease, and lack of resources. His work has included partnerships with USAID and international donors to provide essential healthcare, education, and livelihood opportunities. With a master's in theological studies from Central Baptist Theological Seminary, he is deeply committed to integrating faith and social action. As Ethiopia faces new challenges, including the suspension of USAID, Reverend Feisa continues to advocate for collaborative solutions that empower communities. He is also a dedicated father of 4 and envisions a future where all children can thrive both spiritually and economically. Please join me tonight in welcoming Reverend Ambesu Tola Feisa.
Hello, everyone. As my colleague introduced me, my name is Ambesu Tola Feisa. I'm from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. I have a connection problem that I'm not a technical person in regard to technology. That's why I think I'm having problem. Anyway, I'm trying my best. I supposed to screen share my presentation, but now I'm just connecting through my phone. For some reason, my computer is not connecting, and I I ask an apology for that. And if there is a speaker after me, I can give the opportunity, and if I am able to resolve this problem, I can come back. Or is that be possible?
I think if you just wanted to share verbally with us, I think that would work just fine.
Oh, okay.
Want to do
Okay.
that?
I can share. Let me start from the background of FIDO. Is FIDO called Fire Integrated Development Organization. Is an Ethiopian resident not-for-profit charity organization established in 2002, and I'm one of the founders, and other friends also founded, FIDO with me. When it is first begun, FIDO started at its first level, of operations in Jimma zone in Ethiopia in partnership with Nazarene Compassionate Ministry, NCM, by providing support to 27 orphan and vulnerable children with 10% community support. FIDO gradually extends its services and is currently operating in almost all regions of Ethiopia. Uh, I'm asked to share with you the impact of the stop work order, the SWO of the USAID development projects on the beneficiaries, families of the target groups, and the wider community and the implementing organization, FIDO. Those affected projects are HIV/AIDS projects and a school project. One is family-focused HIV prevention, care, and treatment in one of our regions, Oromia. And the other one is family-focused HIV prevention and care and treatment project in Addis Ababa, in the capital city of Ethiopia. The other one is Mulu KP activities. That means key population. Mulu is local name, and KP is key population. That means we are supporting, commercial sex workers, those have HIV/AIDS in their blood, and we give them antiretroviral treatment in our DICs, drop-in centers, and other services as well. Objective of my presentation is to analyze the impact of the stop work order on HIV prevention and the treatment services, on the beneficiaries, the wider community, and on my organization as well. Understanding this impact is crucial for future interventions and policy decisions that can affect the lives of vulnerable populations. The family-focused HIV/AIDS prevention and care treatment project aims to address the complex challenges faced by populations infected and affected by HIV. The goal of the project was provide comprehensive health services, including prevention, care, and treatment. The target group were highly vulnerable children and their caregivers, adults living with HIV, their families, and sexual partners. Direct beneficiaries are total number of individuals are at 4,880 and 2,646 highly vulnerable children, including children affected by HIV, requiring medical care, education, psychosocial support to ensure their well-being, signifying the need for child-specific interventions. 525 caregivers, parents, highlighting family dynamics, adults living with HIV, about 1,676, the adult population needing continuous care. We have also indirect beneficiaries, over 750,000 community members affected through family and the community services, demonstrating the broad social impact of the project. Community structures such as schools and the local governments benefit indirectly, emphasizing the project's role in community health. Children and the spouses, sexual partners of people living with HIV/AIDS, 466, indicating the wider circle of care and potential risk exposure. The critical roles of the project are: the project provides essential treatment and preventive services to improve health outcomes, highlighting the necessary of consistent care. The challenges they are currently facing: poor health status impacting employability, demonstrating the vicious circle of health and economic stability; limited education and the stigma associated with HIV hinder economic opportunities, leading to increased economic vulnerability; high school dropout rate of children due to lack of school-related expenses as a result of poor economic status of parents. Among these children, 27% of classified as destitute indicates extreme poverty and reliance on external support. 39% identifies as strugglers, those facing economic difficulties but are not in absolute poverty. 34% are ready to grow economically with the support, shows potential for improvement if resources are allocated effectively. Average family size is 1:3 ratio, indicating a high number of dependents, which increases the financial burden on caregivers. Economic activities, reliance on government assistance and NGO support, reflecting limited opportunities for self-sufficiency. Limited income generating activities often yield minimal returns, underscoring the need for economic empowerment programs. Just this week, I got a letter that this family-focused HIV/AIDS care and treatment program, which previously, terminated, that termination is cancelled. We will resume all the activities. But one of the projects among these three HIV/AIDS projects, one is totally terminated. I would like to focus on that one.
Reverend Tola, I think did you perhaps
Yes,
accidentally, oh, there we go. Your sound was not coming through for a moment. So we didn't hear the last few minutes or last few seconds rather.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, the impact of the termination, about 108 full-time staff members terminated, leading to gaps in service delivery and increased workload for remaining staff. Although we are told to proceed, we've preferred a certain level of effort, staff affected, impacting ongoing projects and the community outreach. 438 volunteers are terminated due to the termination of this project. Overall impact of this termination, irreversible consequences of the disruption of services, disruption of ongoing treatment and support services, leading to deteriorating health outcomes, increased stress and anxiety among beneficiaries due to uncertainty in service availability. The other impact is also drug resistance, interruptions in ART, antiretroviral treatment, can lead to mutations that make future treatments less effective. Treatment failure, increased viral loads due to missed dose can jeopardize the health of individuals. Public health threats, increased transmission rates within communities due to untreated individuals. Loss of support services, cessation of vital services, loss of counseling, nutritional support, and psychosocial assistance can lead to despair and worsening health. Consequences for beneficiaries, increased health deterioration and emotional distress, leading to potential rise in hospitalization. Lack of awareness programs, a rise in misinformation about HIV/AIDS leads to increased stigma, discouraging individuals from seeking care. Impact on testing, reduced testing rates, increase the likelihood of new infection, exaggerating public health challenges. In regard to the economic impact, increased illness among individuals leads to reduced productivity and economic instability in communities. The healthcare burden, strain on local healthcare systems due to rising demand of medical care and limited resources. Reputation damage also on organization. Funding cuts threaten sustainability of FIDO's programs, impacting long-term health initiatives. The trust of stakeholders also could be also eroded. Erosion of confidence among partners and the community can hinder future collaboration and funding opportunities. The impact on the staff, jobless lead to financial instability for staff and their families, creating ripple effect on community support systems. And there is also psychosocial stress, increased anxiety and uncertainty about the future can affect staff morale and productivity. The broader implication is also public health concerns, potential spread of drug-resistant HIV strains due to treatment interruptions poses a significant risk, and economic consequences also increased healthcare costs and economic burdens on families and the communities can hinder overall development. This is, the Mulukepe activity project, that is totally terminated by USAID. That the total number of direct services recipients affected by this termination has about 14,319 individuals. The affected clients are classified as key and the priority populations. As I mentioned earlier, these are, commercial sex workers and their clients and the long distance truck drivers. The extensive reach of the projects. The termination also causes loss of critical health services, including counseling and the testing, jeopardizing public health efforts. And the summary overall impact of the termination of this MULU-KP program on right holders. Summary of impact is increased morbidity and mortality rates among people living with HIV due to treatment disruptions, economic and social instability affecting families and the communities, leading to a cycle of poverty and health decline, disruption of essential health services for key population, including access to antiretroviral therapy and treatment for sexuality transmitted infections, STIs, increased vulnerability to HIV transmission and other health issues among priority populations. Termination of drug rehabilitation center services and counseling, leading to a potential rise in substance abuse and the related health complications. Elimination of testing and the treatment services, which could result in undiagnosed infections and increased viral loads. Reduced awareness on basic factors of HIV/AIDS, decrease in awareness raising activities regarding sexual health and the safe practices, potentially leading to higher rates of new infections, loss of community engagement, programs that promote health educations and prevention strategies. Disruption of referral linkage services that connect individuals to necessary healthcare resources, impacting overall healthcare continuity, increased barriers to accessing healthcare for marginalized groups. Loss of group therapy sessions, which provide essential mental health support, potentially leading to increased rates of anxiety and depression among affected individuals, increased stigma and isolation for those who rely on these services for support. There are also long-term consequences. I think you know that. Conclusion of and my presentation and call for action is urgent need to restore services and support for affected population to mitigate the impact of this termination. My call to action is engage stakeholders to address immediate needs and ensure sustainability of health initiatives. Our next step is propose strategies to mitigate impacts, enhance community resilience, and restore trust in health services. The other project, that is affected by this termination is also, we have been supporting one school. That school does not have outside support, but from our administrative costs, we were supporting an elementary school. FIDO is running a formal elementary school, grades from 1 to 6, covering all the costs of the school, including salaries of the teachers and administrative staff, student expenses, scholastic materials, school uniform, reference and the textbooks, feeding programs, and some recreational programs. The students are now about 308 students female are 140 and the male are 168. We currently, we do not have money to feed them, and we cannot feed. Still, we are trying to cover the salary of the teachers. I don't know how much we can go forward, but we have their salary for this month and April, and I don't know for the next months until they finish their school year. If we couldn't pay their salaries, the teachers could stop and the school could be closed without the students finish their academic year. The teachers are, 9 teachers, 6 administrative staffs, including guards, janitors, like that. The impact is disruption in education, potential school closure or reduction in educational services leading to learning gaps, loss of school meals, increased food insecurity among students who rely on the feeding program, reduced access to materials, inability to provide uniforms and scholastic materials, affecting students' self-esteem and academic performance. I have some pictures, but there is no way that I can share with you. But this is all about my presentation. I kindly ask your prayer and support, for this program to be continued. And thank you. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Reverend Tola. We appreciate that. And since we will be posting this webinar on Central's YouTube page later, maybe there's a way we can even provide a link to some of those pictures after the fact. And our final speaker has arrived. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sae, to introduce Alma Ruth.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sae Tu. I am located in Kansas City, Missouri, and I am a MD student in Central Seminary. And it's such an honor to introduce our next speaker, Alma Ruth. She is the founder and director of the Practice Mercy Foundation based in McKellar, Texas. Since 2019, she has dedicated her work to support women and children caught in the complexity of the immigration system, particularly along the Rio Grande Valley. She makes weekly trips to provide critical supplies, spiritual support, and first-hand updates from the field. Originally from Monterrey, Mexico, Alma has been engaged in international faith-based work for decades, serving in regions including Cuba, Slovakia, North India, and the West Bank. She's previously co-founded Mexico to the Nations, a movement training young Mexican missionaries for global humanitarian and faith-based service. Alma graduated from Bible College in northern Mexico and is currently validating her biblical study degree through Stark Bible College. Please join me in welcoming Alma Ruth.
Hi, guys. I'm sorry for joining late to the party, but I'm in Mexico and my phone automatically turns to local time. So I'm like, I'm going to be on time. I have all these alarms. Here I am, the last one. So better late than ever. The rest of the world doesn't have daylight savings. And then, so sorry, but here I am. And as our friend was mentioning, I'm a faith-based humanitarian worker. That's a new name, right? I'm a Christian missionary serving along the southern border. And we are based out of McAllen, Texas, which is the Texas border. And if you know anything, if you're from the United States, you know how difficult has been with our current governor. The Texas governor is very, very anti-immigrant, has installed and initiated what is called the Lone Star operation to try to force migrants to stop coming to the United States, and has caused dozens and dozens of deaths. And so I'm based out of McAllen in a border region called the Rio Grande Valley. Is the northeast Mexico from McAllen, Texas to Brownsville. That region is called the Rio Grande Valley and is part of the Texas border. We are at the last part of the continental US where border crossings and ports of entry. And we've been focusing on asylum seeker women and children. We have, I started practice mercy in 2019 as a response to the humanitarian crisis that we were seeing often in our borders. And we have seen the impact of the cutting of budgets and other ministries. We are faith-based, so we depend on churches and donations from individuals. So personally, we're still struggling, and we have always struggled because we have never received grants. And so in a sense, you know, but we have seen some of our prayer partners and ministry supporters that they're canceling their support because they lost their jobs. So we are indirectly affected by that. And as an immigrant myself, and I have seen the increase of the militarization of the border. We have, on the American side of the border, we have over 500 state troopers, and they send another 500 National Guard for the Texas border. And so that's something that is affecting civil society in how we live and how we worship, how we go to school. And also, I was at the asylum seekers camp that we serve at, and they are pretty much, it feels that governments are hunting asylum seekers. Why do I say this? Because we have a new president. For the first time, there were elections in the United States and elections in Mexico. So that caused a very peculiar phenomena in a region, right, in the North America region. And so we have a female president, you guys. Before the US, who knew? We have a female president. And so, well, she is, taking charge and standing to Mr. Trump and said, no, we're not going to receive your deportees. Only Mexican expelled people that you want to expel. Under Biden, everybody was sent back to Mexico. And Mexico is in no shape or form to receive thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of asylum seekers. So we have seen a phenomenon that is unprecedented. I'm in Mexico, so I'm interviewing. I come to see my family, but also I do a lot of field research and asking Mexican society. So what do you see in the past 10 years, what you're seeing under Biden and under Trump? And they're seeing that you have Cubans, Venezuelans, Haitians, Hondurans. You have, for the first time, Mexico has Black people. We're all brown. So, of the mixing of Spaniards and indigenous people, we don't have Black people. Maybe on the coast, some runaway slaves in the past century that they settled around the Pacific or on the Gulf. But population-wise, it's not, not even 2%. And so we are seeing Haitians, getting jobs, getting the permission from Mexican immigration, Hondurans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, settling down. Monterrey, where my hometown, is around 5 million people. It's the biggest city in the northern part of Mexico. So what I'm in the interviews that I'm seeing is that they're saying, we have people, they're getting jobs, they're getting a place to rent, and they're mingling, they are being involved with society. As our borders, as you know, Mexican cartels control the borders. And it's a very challenging thing to do because you have the Mexican military, the Mexican president he's sending 10,000 Mexican soldiers to the southern border on the Mexico side, but it's like completely little tanks running in the Mexican border towns. And So it's something unprecedented. We've never seen that. We are not a militarized nation. We have our own fights with cartels. So it's a very eye-opening. And then you have international breaches, between Texas and Mexico. So the Rio Grande River is international boundary. So people by the hundreds die drowning on the river trying to cross outside port of entry. And people usually say, why they don't do the legal way? We have no legal way for asylum seekers to reach our borders. You have international bridge, half the bridge belongs to Mexico, half the bridge belongs to the United States. In the middle of the bridge on international waters, you have a checkpoint from Homeland Security where federal agents are there asking for your documents. If you don't have the proper documents, you cannot go past the checkpoint in order to reach the port of entry and request asylum. So people jump on the river, they drown, or they get caught by American Border Patrol agents, and they send back to their country. So it's a mess, right? And so people, it's like, come and see the border so you can have an incarnational witness of what is like, with barbed wire. Under Biden, the National Guard was started with President Trump in the first term. Barbed wire, National Guard soldiers were setting up barbed wire across the river, and provoking more deaths. And the barbed wire is specifically damaging for humans or for nature, for animals. It cuts through the bone. So if you grab it, if you don't see it at night and you're trying to run through the river and go through the delta of the riverbank, you won't see the wire until you're in front of it. And if you try to climb it, it will cut your skin through the bone. And so it's a very, since President Clinton, we have deterrence by death. So people are dying trying to cross the river. Texas Monthly, which is a magazine very recognized in the United States, did a journalist investigation. There's no agency in the United States or Mexico that keeps track of the death. We don't have a place. And then in the El Paso, Arizona, you have people dying in the desert, eaten by animals. So the inhumanity and the cruelty of these practices are astonishing. And we use dogs. The Homeland Security, the Border Patrol, American agents, they use dogs to track the asylum seekers that cross, right? We have the U.S. Coast Guard on the river. You have state troopers. You have the National Guard, speedboats on the river. And then on land, you have horses, you have helicopters, you have ATVs, and you have dogs to track the tracks of the people. And then they release the dogs if they don't find them. In order to track the people that cross the river. And so when people say, so what do you think of open borders? What open borders? We have no open borders. I live at the border. I live 10 miles from the Rio Grande River. And I have helicopters and drones and border patrol in my neighborhood and everything. We cannot go to have tacos, which is a Mexican meal to our African brothers and sisters. It's a Mexican thing that we eat. And so you cannot escape that we are in a militarized region. And then 100 miles from the Rio Grande River, which is the natural boundary between the US and Mexico, you have a checkpoint, a land checkpoint, in which you have Border Patrol, ICE, National Guard, and dogs and horses and everything. And you have to check your document in order to keep traveling north. If you want to get out of the border region by land, there's a checkpoint in 100 miles from the Rio Grande River that you have to show your documents. God forbid you're a person of color, Hispanic, Black, whatever, all of us who are not white, and you forget your documents, you're in trouble. You have to show your Social Security, your driver's license to prove you can be in the United States. And so it's a big deal for people of color like us. If you're white, they won't even ask you. You're driving, you're white, bye. So the profiling and the prejudice and the racism is very present, very, very present. How we treat asylum seekers from Ukraine and Russia who are white against how we treat Haitians Central Americans, Venezuelans, is very different. Russians or Ukrainians will never be treated like the Venezuelans that were deported to El Salvador or to Guantanamo base. That would never happen. So profiling and race has a big thing to do with immigration. And as a person of faith, God has planted in my heart that immigration is a life or death conversation. And as people of faith, we need to choose life. And so we are praying that all this mess of the USA being dismantled and has affecting the world, entire world with this, that it can be solved. And so we are concerned by our own funding. You know, oh, you don't have asylum seekers, the asylum seekers camps are empty, so we're gonna stop our support, right? We're starting to lose some funding, and we are not even, you know, grant related to the government. And so we, as people of faith, we need to see how can we sound the alarm? How can we keep speaking, right? A verse that we embrace in our ministry is Isaiah 1:17. Seek justice, learn to do right. And we are not born with a download. Oh, this is the right thing to do, and we need to do this, and we need to stand for. We need to learn. So learn, you know, learn to do right. Seek justice, because God is a God of justice. And how can we do that? And so needless to say, we have a bunch of stuff to deal with, because when we go into the asylum seekers camp in Mexico, we have to be interrogated when we come in, and then on the way back, we get interrogated also by American Border Patrol. But I don't know if you guys have any questions. 1 second that we have left of our, I think. I broke record like Speedy Gonzalez.
Well, thank you very much, Alma. We appreciate that. So we do have about 10 minutes here before our time is up. So I wanted to open it to the floor first to see if anyone has any questions for all of our speakers or for any one of our speakers in particular.
Hello, I have a speaker for Andrew. Or I have a question for Andrew. I'm UCC as well. And so when you say that your organization gets 100% of funding from the local churches within the UCC, that's great, but it's also, it could be a hindrance for us in our ability to do more. So why not write grants and receive funding from the government?
Yeah, Stacey, great question. I don't have the historical answer for you, I'll be honest. But I can say practically speak. So we, as the UCC, we're not an implementing body. So we're an enabling organization. So all the funds that we have, we disperse to local implementing partners. And because essentially of that relationship to implementing partners, and because we're not actually the ones implementing, it is slightly more complex, I guess, in terms of the grant writing process. I know a lot of organizations that do operate and have operated that way, especially with regards to US AID funding. I can say now in retrospect, I'm glad that we didn't have that model because it has made us more resilient in the moment. And it also gives us more flexibility in terms of making sure that we are working strictly with missionally aligned partners and are not having to tailor the work that we're doing to the specific conditions of whoever we're receiving grants from. That may not be exactly a direct answer, but your question of capacity is certainly a drawback of pursuing that model, certainly.
Thank you.
I'll ask a general question for any of our speakers that want to chime in on this. We have, I think, Dr. Lofgren, you were the one who mentioned that there is a discrepancy between what is being reported in media, both in the United States and internationally, and what is actually happening on the ground. Have you all identified any sources to keep current with what's happening on the ground? What have you found to be the most helpful, most accurate sources of information? Because I think, Dr. Lofgren, you also mentioned there are so many things happening at once right now. It's hard to know what's the most pressing issue at any moment.
I mean, I'm talking to people in country. I think NPR has some good like Goats and Soda. I think they have like a series that tends to be correct. The BBC tends to be better, and then just like specific local media. But I mean, I feel like it's changing rapidly, and then what actually comes, it's also spotty. So it's like, in Ethiopia, that group might get funding. Like one of the programs is shut down, one is open. Like it's hard to know that. And so I don't know. I found that one of the most challenging pieces. I don't know if others have ideas.
I would second that the information, navigating the information landscape right now is particularly difficult, and just um, it's difficult because there's so many different court cases at the moment and various injunctions that are being implemented and then rescinded and then implemented and rescinded. It's really difficult to keep track of what light switch may have been turned on or turned off at any given time. It's certainly something that one of the biggest challenges.
Any other questions for our presenters before we begin moving to wrap it up?
I'm wondering about the psychosocial impact of the funding cuts, the USAID cuts, but also the other sort of ripple effects, right? Nothing happens in isolation. And so there's just there are all these multiple things happening. And I'm wondering what have you seen as the sort of psychosocial impact? Some of you all alluded to that, but I'd love to hear just a little bit more about what that looks like for people trying to metabolize all of this in their bodies.
I'll jump in, I guess. One of the things I'm saying is that there's the psychosocial impact of those who are receiving kind of the end beneficiaries of the aid system. And then there's also the psychosocial impact on those who are implementing the programs. And so just the constant stress of not knowing how do you plan amongst this level of uncertainty, both for yourself and your family as an implementer, but also because inevitably those of us who engage in this work care about the people that I think most of us at least care about the people that we're trying to help. And so then you have that compounded concern and worry and fear for what's going to happen to those individuals. And so it is I would say a compounding psychosocial kind of nightmare that I think that we're all having to navigate at some level. Yeah.
I went to a conference last week and they had some leaders from across Africa who were talking about this, but I mean, I think the just worry and like on the ground anxiety and people could speak out, but just don't want to be necessarily terminated if they don't want to, and they don't want to speak ill of like the different groups. They actually like thanked us multiple times for being Americans, as though that was like kind, and I just kind of felt like throwing up. But I think it's also just like all the information and like the chaos. I feel like I sort of have to turn it off and like have to I don't know, try to focus on like concrete things. I think for the patients on the ground, there's a ton of anxiety, and I mean, it's not in isolation, and people definitely are seeing it and aware of it, but it's not clear what will happen. And so I think it's globally just a lot of anxiety for a lot of people.
Well, Andrew, you mentioned during your presentation about that the moral argument no longer is effective with this administration. And you gave two different ways of perhaps reframing it. And I only wrote one of them down. I didn't catch the second one, but saving taxpayer money through this work would be one. And what was the other one?
The other one is just thinking about how do you reframe this work as serving the national interest? It feels weird as a humanitarian actor to frame our work in those instances, especially when so much of our work is, for a lot of us, is around this effort to decolonize some of these historical structures. But at the same time, I'm aware that there's got to be some pragmatic strategic thinking about how do we message things to, certain members of Congress who may be more receptive if they can sell support for this in language that the administration is not going to immediately turn on them for. And maybe, I'm not. I don't have delusions that we can completely reverse this, what has happened. But at this point, I think it's about trying to stop the bleeding where we can, to try to stabilize things as much as possible, to reduce some of that uncertainty. So just doing some strategic thinking about how we're smart about doing that.
It feels very bizarre to me that the moral argument is not the key argument that we can use in our world today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dr. Lofgren mentioned that in the grants that they're working on, those kind of list of terms you don't use, and so it's just about finding alternative language to talk about things. It's not that the work has changed; it's just about the language we use to describe that work has to change, at least for the time being, to navigate some of this.
Well, and I
It
think
is bizarre.
I think we have to acknowledge that in this current climate, who's communicating the language also has to be thought through. When people are wholesale just being ignored and wiped away simply because of the color of their skin, we also have to think about what we're saying and who's saying it so that they can hear it, because they're not even, if you come a certain way, you're not even being heard anymore. And that's sad, but it's true.
All right, well, I think we are right at time, and so I'll turn it over to Dr. Ruth Roselle, who's the Executive Director of the Buttry Center for Peace and Nonviolence, to close us out.
So thanks to each one of you who are here today. At the Buttry Center, we encouraged and kind of supported the initiation of this Peace and Justice Ministries certificate program. And so it's especially a delight to be at this forum and see the work that they're doing. So thank you to them, and thank you to each of our speakers that have conveyed so much to us. I think we've learned a great deal. A lot of it's kind of disheartening and even heartbreaking. And yet I've also sensed that each of the speakers, and they represent so many other people as well, that it's good to know that really competent and compassionate people are working on this and trying to do the very best to bring, to do what can be done within the current administration. So thank you to each one of our speakers as well. I did want to mention the Buttry Center is supportive of this program and the certificate program. Its mission is to theologically engage, educate, and connect people of faith for seeking justice, nurturing peace, and caring for creation. And if you're interested in learning more about the work we're doing, and especially right now it's related to climate and creation care, we have a page on the Center website, and we have a Facebook page that you can get more information. I thought it good with all this heaviness that we have been talking about today, and kind of really the social psycho effects of being in the midst of this chaos and feeling like it's really hard to impact it, that it would be good to close with a word of prayer. So would you pray with me as we close today? Our gracious God, we know you to be compassionate, especially to those who are suffering and most vulnerable. And so we pray this day for your mercy to be shown in these difficult times. We pray for the many whose suffering is increased. We lift them up to you, be near them, be a source of strength. We pray for our speakers and all in positions who are seeking to help. Give them wisdom and perseverance. And we pray that your Spirit may work in this world and even through us to bring greater peace and justice, comfort and hope. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So thank you all for coming, and blessings on the rest of your day.